Hello, and welcome to the Bible for Worship here at St. Paul Lutheran Church on this fifth Sunday of Easter, when our scripture reading is in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 2 through 10. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. Come to him, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, see, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. This honor, then, is for you who believe. But for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Here in this letter to 5 communities of northern Asia Minor, the author of 1 Peter addresses the readers as those newly welcomed to the Christian community. The frequency with which the adjective new and verbal forms of renewed and reawakened tell us how the author is looking at this community. The author probably is not Peter, the disciple and apostle. The letter is written later than Peter would have lived, but it is written in Peter's name and may presumably reflect a connection with those in Rome with whom Peter had some association. The letter represents itself as being written from Rome to these churches in Asia Minor. And who are these newborns, and what is it that they are to do in their new life? Well, the writer says, like newborns, seek out that spiritual milk, that mother's milk that newborns naturally move toward even in the first moments after birth. Here, this is a spiritual milk. And the writer, in the first of many scriptural references, brings in both Numbers 20 and also Psalms 34, verse 8. Taste and see that the Lord is good. If indeed you have tasted how good the Lord is, the writer says, then come to that spiritual milk that will nourish you. To a rock, to a stone. In Numbers 20, Israel in the wilderness, complaining about their circumstances and how much better they had it in Egypt, was directed to a rock where Moses was instructed to strike the rock with his rod, and out came water, enough for the entire Israelite community there in the wilderness. It came to be quite the legendary rock, the rock of contention, because Israel dared contend with what God was doing, bringing them out of Egypt through the wilderness. And here, this is the beginning of a series of references to stones or rocks in the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, in which a number of different placements and functions of stones or rocks get used by the author in order to talk about who Jesus is in particular. There's reference first to Isaiah 28:16, where God says, I'm laying a cornerstone in Zion. And then for those for whom this is a positive thing, who have come to that stone, who respond to what God has done, Psalm 118:22 provides the imagery that the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner. But for those for whom this stone is meaningless, or who stumble over it, who don't notice it, who don't pay attention to it, then we're back into Isaiah chapter 8:14, referencing a stone that makes them stumble, a rock that makes them fall. This is the stone as Jesus. And for the writer, it really doesn't matter that these different quotations position the stone as either a foundation stone, or as the head of the corner, or as a stone in the street over which you trip. All of these images have Jesus as the stone that God has placed in the midst of the people. And it's interesting because the Apostle Paul, writing in Romans chapter 9 in verse 33, identifies the stone of these same verses as the stone of Torah, as the foundation of Israel's life over which they have stumbled in Paul's understanding. But this author uses it differently, pulling together these verses, and ultimately uses it to undergird the hope, the command, the encouragement in chapter 2, verse 5 here, that you, as living stones, be built up on the cornerstone that is Christ, into a spiritual sanctuary. Stones are all over the place. Christ as stone, people as living stones, the stone of a sanctuary, the stone over which people stumble. All saying that what these people new to the faith are experiencing can be understood in terms of what God has been saying all along in Israel, and now in the Jewish community as they look to Israel's scripture. The third image that is used here by the author is that of peoplehood. Again, echoing scripture, Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people. First said to Israel at Sinai, and now extended to include all those in this Jesus community to whom the author writes. And pairing that with Hosea 1:9 and 2:23, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. Again, first spoken to Israel, now spoken to those also in the Jesus community. All of this says that new life in Jesus Christ is not a one and done thing. It doesn't happen and then you just go on with life, but rather, like newborns in it, you seek nourishment. Like those who are placed into it as a stone, a living stone, as Christ was placed into the world by God as a stone, you too be built up in this new life. And as God's people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, live out this new life that God has given you. It was this writer's encouragement and promise and call to those newly come into the community of Christ in Asia Minor centuries ago. It remains the call of God and Christ to us as God's people, a royal priesthood, a chosen people, holy nation, God's own people. May we live it out. God bless.